Alright, y'all, welcome back. Today's going to be Unit 4, Day 5. So reminders to have out your history notebook and you're taking notes as you move through the video. And make sure you complete the vocabulary for this video. So, let's go ahead and get started. So our terms for today are going to be Zaibatsus, Tanaka Memorial, Diaz, Zapata, Madero, Villa, Huerta, Obregon, the Mexico Constitution of 1917, the LPRI, and Cardenas. So our concepts for today are going to be the causes of and effects of Mexican Revolution and the reasons and effects for Japanese imperialism. So let's start off with Japan. So Japan is very disappointed with the Treaty of Paris. Because Japan had wanted more of Germany's Asian colonies and more of just European colonies in the Pacific anyway. During World War I, Japan will conquer and kind of take over all of these German Pacific Island colonies. And Japan had gotten some of those, but not all of those, so they were kind of upset. So Japan began to turn increasingly hostile. They're going to favor a more authoritarian government. They're going to plan for war and conquest between World War I and World War II. The Meiji Restoration and Economic Revolution led to many changes. If you recall, we get great industrial combines, Zaibatsus. They're going to launch heavy industrial expansion. But there's an issue. Japan's going to rely heavily on the import of raw materials and trade because they're an island. They don't have a lot of just natural resources lying around. So that's also a big reason for their thoughts about conquering other places, because it's like they have materials. Now, by 1925, the state is going to initiate compulsory primary school education. This is a big deal, right? Because now you're going to have a smarter, more educated classes, right? So now, with all of these issues, right? Lack of raw materials, right? Moving toward more authoritarian government. In the 1920s, leaders are going to take a greater role. Military leaders, generals, are going to take a greater role in the 1920s. And by 1928, they draw up the Tanaka Memorial, and the Tanaka Memorial is like the Japanese plan for a war in the Pacific. So even before World War II is even a thought in anybody's mind, even before the Great Depression kind of leads to all these things, Japan is already prepping and preparing for a war in the Pacific. So also during this time, we have a lot of revolutions. The revolutions are going to be plentiful and all over the place during this time period. Now, a lot of these are going to challenge Western dominance. They're going to offer alternatives to the Western models. Now, through 1939, we have Iran, 1905, the Young Turks in the Ottoman Empire in 1908. We have Mexico in 1910. We have the first China in 1912. Then we have 1917. There's two: the February Revolution and the October Revolution. Right? We're going to have the WHAP revolution in Egypt in 1919. Turkey's going to have another revolution in the 1920s. India in the 1920s through the 40s. And then China's going to have two, 1911 and 1928 to 1949. So, again, it's one of those where these revolutions are taking place and they're really starting to push back. So, today we're going to talk about kind of Mexico's revolutions. And we'll continue talking about those revolutions as we move through this unit. And keep going, right, with Mexico's upheavals, right? So we have Porfirio Diaz, right, in power in Mexico, right? And he's not doing great, right? He's rigging elections. He's really kind of pushing against, anybody who goes against him, he ousts them. He kind of rigs the elections, right? And in 1910, we have when the election comes up, right? Francisco Madero, right? He decides to run against Diaz. Well, Diaz arrests him. He arrests anybody who runs against him. He rigs the election, and who wins? Well, Diaz wins. Well, this immediately begins a revolt in Mexico. Right in the north, we have Pancho Villa. He's going to organize resistance, kind of push back. And more of the south or middle, right, we have Zapata, who's going to rally native populations, peasants, behind the banner of land reform. Now, over time, they will drive Diaz from power, and they're going to replace him with Madero. Now, Madero is more of a moderate, and he's going to like promise land reform and industrialization reform, and he's going to promise all these things. Well, those prove inadequate in changing anything, right? And in the 1913, so he's in power for 2 years, 3 years. He's removed, right? He's assassinated by General Victoriano Huerta. Um, and Huerta attempts to restore a dictatorship, but Pancho Villa and Zapata are going to rebel again, and they're going to like remove him from power, right, in 1914, right? And from 1914 to 1920, there's just going to be like infighting, and they're fighting amongst themselves. They can't like even get the government kind of on its feet. By 1920, Obregon was elected, and he attempts to resuscitate, kind of bring back Mexico's economy. He does do that fairly well, but it won't really be till under Cardenas from 1934 to 1940, who's going to really bring land reform and kind of start things with the birth of public education, and he's really going to start getting Mexico kind of going again. Now, also during this time, during this revolutions, right, we have the Mexican Constitution of 1917, which is the same constitution that's still in place today, and kind of really kind of brings Mexico kind of into the kind of modern age. It promises land and education reform. It limits foreign ownership of Mexican industries and resources. It guarantees the rights of workers, and it limits the church ownership of land. Now, post-revolutionary Mexico, we're going to have a rediscovering of native heritage with art, culture, a lot of traditions kind of start or kind of brought back into the Mexican culture. Now, not everyone's going to like all the changes taking place, right? The church really doesn't like this. The church is really opposed to the secularization of schools, and kind of the kind of them losing power in Mexican society, and they actually developed their own kind of movement called the Christos movements of the 20s, which is going to combine some peasants, politicians, and church. They're going to try to rebel, but they're going to get put down pretty quick. As many Mexican peoples and the government is tired of revolution by the mid 1920s, and so it doesn't gain a lot of momentum. Now, the U.S. and Mexico, right? They start off doing pretty good, and then they start to fighting, and they go back to doing pretty good, right? So, in Veracruz, in the 1918, right, the U.S. is going to bombard Veracruz for failure of the Mexican soldiers to salute the U.S. flag. So an extremely petty reason to sort of try to almost go to war with Mexico. But Pancho Villa, right, is going to be like, okay, bet, and he's going to like start attacking southern the United States. Now, the U.S. is going to send an army into northern Mexico to try to capture Pancho Villa. They almost do, but World War I kind of pulls the U.S. Army into World War I, so they kind of pull out of Mexico, and they do kind of calm down. Mexico and the United States become kind of friends again, right? But we also have that U.S. interests in Mexico, right, kind of kind of rise up and kind of stabilize. Um, Cardenas is going to nationalize oil companies and nationalize kind of the control of those oil companies to Mexico. Now, during that, the president during that time is going to be FDR, and FDR is going to be like, "Cool, that's fine. We're dealing with the Great Depression. You guys are cool. We just want peace and trading," and so that kind of really gains a lot of momentum for Mexico's kind of recovery economically. Now, we have the LPRI, or the Party of Institutionalized Revolution. Um, and this is really kind of the big political party in Mexico all the way into the modern day. Um, Now, while they are technically a democracy, and they are they have elections and things, it's really kind of for the longest time it was kind of one party dominated, and that party's the PRI. Um, but it's not as like authoritarian as say like communism, where like you can join other political parties, but the PRI is going to rig those elections. They're going to really kind of dominate those politics. They're going to rig elections. They're going to like put people in power, things like that. But in the 1990s, people really start to be like, why are you here? Like the revolution was 80 years ago. What's going on? What are you doing? Right? But they still stay in power. But they really come to power because of the economic boom that takes place after Cardenas and kind of the nationalization of the oil industry and other things, right? They really stay in power. So that's where I have you today, right? Make sure you're taking notes, make sure you're doing the vocabulary, and I'll see you guys in class.